Our sponsor for this afternoon's session is Knowledge Network, we celebrated their 30th anniversary yesterday. Happy birthday or happy anniversary to Knowledge again. I'm delighted that we have with us a wonderful guest. The origin of this session in particular is that we were thinking in terms of, everything that's happening in terms of film and television seems to be happening at an accelerated pace, as we talked about in the last session. And I think the idea of sort of multiple platforms and merging technologies is one that is of ongoing interest and one that is obviously expanding every year. And more filmmakers are finding that they need to be aware of ways in which to have their content seen on multiple platforms. This in particular was what I thought was an inspiring case study because it, as you'll see when we have a little demo of it, it's wildly creative. And I remember when I first saw the films A Scanner Darkly and Waking Life, just thinking, wow, this is going to inspire so many other filmmakers to think more creatively and to merge technologies. And while there's been some of that, in my personal view, there hasn't been nearly enough. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Tommy, who's joined us, and it's Pallotta, is that the correct pronunciation? Yeah. Pallotta. Tommy is a visionary storyteller who creatively blends technology with filmmaking, animation, and interactivity. He's led a research team at Microsoft Research and Development to create design and interactive animated storytelling experiences. He's made music videos. He's produced several award-winning animated shorts, including Snack and Drink, which is now part of the permanent collection at MoMA in New York. He's worked and produced Richard Linklater films, first Waking Life, the award-winning feature film, and then went on to do the Philip K. Dick's A Scanner Darkly, starring Keanu Reeves and Robert Downey Jr. He has animated using proprietary software and a technique developed by himself, which we'll talk about a little further in the discussion. And his latest project is the Emmy-nominated transmedia thriller, Collapsus, which we will talk about soon. Please join me in a warm welcome for Tommy. So, Tommy, I think first off, it would be good for us to get a bit of a sense of, as a filmmaker, we have people in this room who are from all ranges, between emerging filmmakers up to senior filmmakers, and producers, writers, directors. Maybe we can get a quick show of hands. First of all, directors. Show of hands. Okay, hands down again. And writers? Hands down. Producers? Great. Okay, so lots of producers. And then in terms of, if you would consider yourself an emerging filmmaker and that maybe you've made a couple of shorts but you haven't gone on to a feature-length project. Great. And everybody else who's done sort of mid-length to feature-length. Okay, great. So it's
and who doesn't know what they are?
Or who defines categorization? So then maybe you can talk a little bit about how you, I don't know how you define yourself now that you said you don't know what you are, but to start off, how did you get here?
How did I get here?
What's the trajectory? Because I know that you have a background in technology as well. Was that your entry point into film?
Not really. I studied philosophy, and I don't really have a background in film or technology, so there you go. I was interested in filmmaking, but I was from Texas. And at that time, I thought that you couldn't really get to make movies because you had to either have an uncle who was like a movie producer or director, or you had to be rich, and I didn't have either of those. But I loved baseball, and I met this guy named Richard Linklater, and he loved baseball, and so we started talking about baseball. And then he went on and made a movie called Slacker, and he asked me to be in it, and I was in it, and I was really surprised that anybody went to go see it, much less it sort of becoming a part of this cultural zeitgeist. And then when that sort of, went to festivals and actually got a distributor and got seen, I was like, oh, well, if he can do it, I can do it too. So I just thought, I'll try to make movies as well. And I started to do that in the traditional sense, made a feature film, directed it, used all my money and resources, and then it took about 4 years and went through the festival circuit and everything like that. But then I was completely depleted, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. But I knew that I wanted to do something else, and I could sort of see that on this digital horizon that things were about to change, that there was going to be sort of a paradigm shift. And I didn't know how or what or why, but I knew that that was something I was interested in. And so I kind of shifted to more computer animation and sort of making movies with computers.
And then that led into Waking Life?
I met a software programmer and computer animator named Bob Sabiston, and he was really interested in sort of filmmaking. And so I had a space, and I said, well, why don't we get together and see if there's a way that we can sort of work together. And at the time, we thought, why don't we take the best parts of film and the best parts of animation and see if there's a way to bring them together, because they both are very laborious, and there's sort of pros and cons to each one. But we thought, with the film, you can sort of be spontaneous. You can just sort of shoot something and you get that sort of realism. With animation, you have this sort of visual sheen that just makes it cool to look at. So we thought, why don't we make those two things together? And we did these sort of really rough experiments very early on that were just really black and white rotoscoping techniques. And rotoscoping means that you draw over live action. And this is like probably late 90s. And we assumed that there would be a computer program that would allow you to do that. Now, Flash does it, Photoshop, After Effects. But at that time, there was no simple-to-use program that allowed you to do that. So he actually wrote a program that allowed you to just draw over a QuickTime frame.
What's happened with that program?
Well, it's still being used. So, have you seen the Charles Schwab commercials? Bob did those, my partner.
And what happens in the Charles Schwab commercials?
They just talk about financing or something like that.
But it's the whole thing is
the rotoscope, yeah.
The same
But it's basically the same thing that was used all the way through Scanner Darkly.
Has anybody here not seen either, or not familiar with what the look is of either a Scanner Darkly or Waking Life? Please raise your hand if you haven't. Okay.
I can show.
We'll show something, a little something, so that you understand what we're talking about. But I'd like to actually just take a quick look at the early rotoscoping that you were telling us about.
So, one of the things that we were sort of interested in at the beginning was how you could sort of take the banal and the sort of very ordinary, and almost through animating it, make it more interesting. And so we did a road trip from New York back to Austin, Texas, and just sort of ran into a bunch of random people, including this guy.
Yeah, robbed 17 banks and I finally got caught.
Just ran into him on the street.
When you rob a bank, if you ever go to rob a bank, banks that have FDIC on the door stand for Federal Depository Insurance Corporation. There's a list of laws or rules that they have to be insured. They can't have an armed guard on the premises, and they have to cooperate 100%. Even if they don't think that, even if you don't threaten them with a weapon, just the fact they're being robbed, they have to cooperate with it, so they have to give you the money. And it's just that simple. I was out 20 minutes and I was in a motel room with a hooker. Drinking beer, getting stoned, getting laid.
So we would just run into random people, and we usually just set up a camera, and I'd wait for whoever would come up to me. I wouldn't try to go up to them. And because those people who really wanted to tell their story usually were the better interviews. And then to do the animation, we didn't have any money. We had a couple of computers at our house, and we just put up flyers and said, like, if you want to learn to animate, come to our house and work for free. So if they came for one day, then they just did a couple of frames. If they came, longer, then they did more. And then kind of at the end of the trip, yeah, this was us coming back into Austin. 97, there we go. It's me on the right, Bob on the left.
People are basically generally nice, I have to say, and generous. And people aren't, they look funny. Hey, Claudia. All right. Yeah. Yeah.
This has to make it to the news.
Alright, you want to be interviewed? We're doing a short film. Yeah. Would you like to be interviewed for our film?
You'll be
You'll be
animated.
an animated cartoon character. You'll be an animated cartoon character.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's redundant, but that's what you'd be.
So yeah, those are the very early things, and we ended up making a couple of interstitials for MTV, sort of in that style, and they were really interested in maybe doing a series with us, and then they saw this, and they were like, no, we don't want to do a series with you, so that was the end of the MTV phase.
So is this part of what inspired Waking Life in the first place then?
Yeah, there was sort of an iteration, like this was just sort of really simple, but you saw a little color. And then almost after this, I randomly, well, I didn't randomly. There was a girl that I had a crush on, and I wanted to meet her, so I went up to her at the cafe and I said, hey, do you want to be interviewed? And she didn't want to be, and she was there with her sister, and her sister said, my son's autistic, and he's obsessed with cartoons. Could you interview him and animate him? And I thought, sure. Can I show a little bit?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So this was a little piece that we did with Ryan. I'll sort of skip ahead a little bit.
Said the hiccups, the lips in the mouth hollow and babysitting blues. The lost mother love and that's what friends are for. The bell, the cats, and Pavel lonesome ranger. Mail order, mayhem, and law and disorder. And finally, a last night at Zorowitz, and then Sophie's visit. You know, the mouse known as Zorowitz is Bible. Son. How do you know? Because I saw him before.
So we're going to 7-Eleven for you?
I'm going to get a snack and drink. Like, probably a double gulp and some candy. Like nerds. Let's watch one. I usually mix them all.
What?
I usually mix them all.
All the different drinks?
Yes, all the different drinks. Yes, I like that.
Even diet?
Yes. Oops.
That tastes good?
Yes.
Any name for that?
It's all mixed flavors. It's mixed drink. It's window. Yeah. Rainbow nerds. Sounds. Alright. Yes, I like them. Yeah. We're from the wild world of Wonka.
So, at this time also is when Toy Story and the big sort of computer animation, feature film, and television things hitting at the same time. But we're really trying to go against almost all the trends of that period, which was like the most photorealistic or the most polygons and the tightly scripted things. We're really approaching it almost like jazz and just throwing the doors open, letting people do whatever they wanted. Nobody was paid to do the animation here. And we didn't even know some of the people. They would just come to our house and just do it for a while.
So this is like crowdsourcing in terms of the...
very early, before,
Right. With people who had never done it before.
Right. And so the tool was sort of easy enough that anybody, even if you didn't know how to draw, and because it's rotoscoping, because you're basically drawing over an image as a guide track, it allowed, anybody could do it. And so that was sort of the idea, and it was really going against the whole notion of character design or sort of directing, this sort of singular vision or look.
And then when you did Waking Life, you, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong,
Right.
but I'm assuming that you made the film with traditional methods, and then
Yeah.
afterwards you rotoscoped over it. But then there were some scenes that were completely inventive and were
Right.
within the scene, like characters would be able to do things that they physically otherwise wouldn't do.
You guys seen Waking Life? You want to see a trailer or?
Yeah, let's see a trailer.
I'll see a trailer, and then I'll talk about it, because there was really nothing traditional about it either. So it's sort of one of those, but it's sort of a variation on the same. Oops, that's different. Waking Life trailer. Oops, sorry.
Your life is yours to create.
Maybe I only exist in your mind. I'm still just as real as anything else. It seemed like I'd walked into an alternate universe.
You haven't met yourself yet.
I'm trapped.
I want real human moments. I want to see you.
I'm not in an objective, rational world.
You can have any kind of sex you want. Seems like everyone's sleepwalking through their waking state or walking through their dreams.
So, you produce a neo-human, the individual no longer restricted by time and space.
I'm just trying to get like a sense of where I am. Just wake up.
Do you remember me? When I say love, the sound comes out of my mouth and it hits the other person's ear, travels through their memories of love or lack of love.
It's like I'm being prepared for something.
On really romantic evenings herself, I go salsa dancing with my confusion.
Everyone knows fun rules.
You can do whatever you want to.
Everything is possible.
You a dreamer?
Yeah.
I don't see too many around it.
Wow.
So, almost the same ideas behind this, because again, we signed each artist, and a lot of the artists that we actually were able to hire for this and pay were people that were kind of working for us for free on the other projects before.
Can you just track backwards? Did Richard shoot the film first on
Yeah,
film?
it's all shot on film, but when we were looking for the people in the movie, we put out flyers and said, do you have interesting ideas? And we put ads in the newspapers, and we would interview these people when they came in. And so we were looking for people with really strong points of view and sort of very specific interest. And we had an outline of the movie, but then Rick was able to sort of retro script some of the things to fit these people, and sometimes it was just exactly what those people said the first time that they came into the office.
Okay.
So we're sort of crowdsourcing the script and the acting as well.
Wow. But you shot on film instead of video, even though you were
No,
gonna-
we shot on video.
On video, okay.
Yeah, consumer level cameras. So everything that we had done at this point had been, the lowest end.
So no
cameras.
special lighting or anything like that, just...
No lighting.
Right.
Just a little bit. I mean, it was shot by Richard Linklater and myself.
Yeah.
We had a sound person and a PA, and that was like our crew. So he would like call me up in the morning and go like, hey, what do you want to do today? And I'd be like, I don't know, let's go do the scene. And then we'd go and shoot it. So we didn't actually do the animation in my house this time, but we shot the movie in my house.
And per minute of screen time, how many hours did you have to put in doing the rotoscoping?
So what started out to be this idea that we would do something really quick and simple, as we started with each iteration, we would add more features and try to make it more realistic. And at this point, I think we're working at about 250 hours per minute. So,
250 hours per minute. Okay, so that's, let's say it's 100 minutes long. So
yeah,
that's...
it was less than that, but
Right. 25,000 hours.
Yeah.
That's some post schedule.
Yeah.
How long did it take? How long did it take you to?
It didn't take that long. I mean, it took a year,
Right.
a little bit over a year.
So you just had a lot of people on board
Not
working
that
on
many.
it.
I mean, it really. I mean, maybe my math is wrong, but it was like, 12 core people and then some other,
Right.
people that we went out, and but everybody worked really hard, and it seemed to. I don't know. It worked, and then it was also the first independently produced animated film that sort of got worldwide distribution. And it was about Fox Searchlight. We premiered it at Sundance, and we made the movie for $1.5 million, which is still a decent budget, but for computer animated features, it was pretty much unheard of at that time. So.
And so from there to get to Collapsus, I know there's some steps along the way, but
Yeah. Well, so should I?
yeah.
So after that, I made it Scanner Darkly, which took a lot longer to make, and that was a bigger thing. But then I was sort of interested. What I'm doing right here is making hybrids. So I'm basically using the computer as the main tool to tell a story. And one of the interesting things that happened with Waking Life at that time, again, it came out in 2001, is that it was a not very well-known movie. It was an art house release. It never was shown in a lot of theaters, and it didn't get a wide distribution. But as I started to travel to different festivals, people started to hear about it. I started to hear about it more and more over the years. And so I'd ask people in Barcelona, how do you know about this movie? They're like, BitTorrent. I was like, cool. So I started to realize that the internet's the way to sort of, that my work's going to actually get seen. And I started to experiment and create more and more stuff for the web, specifically, including making a movie before Collapsus specifically for BitTorrent. So I released it to the torrents. I pirated my own movie, and it did really well, and it was great, and it was super cool that I didn't have to. I cut out the middleman. So Collapsus was actually a project that was started before I came on board, and it was a production company in Amsterdam called Submarine. They're a cross-media production studio for 10 years. They're making games, documentaries, and animation. And I was, of course, aware of them because that's what I was doing at the time, and there weren't that many people doing it in the past 10 years that were kind of really seeking that out. But they didn't really know how to do it. And they came to me the last minute. They were like, we have this budget. We got to get this done quick because it has to be released when this documentary is released. And I said, what you're trying to do is really ambitious, blending a game, documentary, and animation. And I can't really think of an example where it's been done correctly, but if you don't mind that I'm going to fail miserably, then I'll do it. And they were like, sure, do it.
Great offer.
So I thought, great, I'll do it. So here, I'll show you a little presentation of it. So I'll just start out with a little teaser of it.
You need to think bigger picture. Use your audience. Do some real reporting.
Everything's gone to a crisis point. It's now full-out civil war, fueled by blood, oil, and oppression.
For the coming years, we are now victims of our own stupidity and greed.
No, I'm here. That wasn't us.
You are a liar.
I may be many things, but a liar I'm not.
Energy industry isn't there to help us, it's here to kill us. We must do that.
And you're helping to feed the fire.
Feed the fire. That's good.
Do not believe the lies. You'll know what I know. You'll see what I see. This is our war.
You need to get out of there, Vera.
Oh, that's pretty exciting. I haven't seen that in a while. Basically, what happens is VPRO, the Dutch broadcaster, commissioned a documentary about peak oil and the transition that's going to happen after that. And what they found out, and what's happening pretty much all over the world, is that the audience for the sort of documentary type reportage is getting older and dwindling. And so what they wanted to do was reach a younger audience, and that was part of the initiative of making this. But so there's a documentary component of it that they sort of commissioned that I didn't have anything to do with. That was pretty traditional, talking heads, experts talking about.
Dependent on one place, and one supplier, and one of everything. It's, to my experience, not a good place to be, strategically.
This is a situation that sooner or later somebody gives. It's like building a very tall building without good architectural plan.
To me, that's the significant issue that kind of drives me a little bit, is why, knowing that we're so vulnerable, why haven't we done something to change?
So, I mean, it's something that I'm really interested in. But again, if you notice, every single person that they interviewed was like a middle-aged white guy. And it's just the same talking head thing. We've all seen it a million times. So really, how do you engage people to get them excited about this if it's not really something that they're apt to watch? So what we did was sort of take the documentary components as part of it, create a story that there was this sort of alternative network of people, sort of like current TV, where young people are out reporting, and sort of integrated a lot of the documentary footage within the experience, and also put them online with YouTube as well, but sort of broke it up, chopped it up, and mashed it up with fictional elements as well as sort of the real elements. So we're making a hybrid between fictional reporters and actual data. There's also a gaming element to it. Part of the thing that's really difficult about this is getting your head around this sort of issue and how precarious the nature of energy really is, and what it takes in order to bring energy in and to utilize it. And so we created a sort of simulation game within it. It's really just like any sim game that gives you an idea of how the balance works within any sort of environment. And then the other thing that we did was really to take a lot of the issues. With the documentary, we created a meta-scenario. And from that meta-scenario, we created a fictional script and took a lot of the issues and embodied them into characters. So instead of the middle-aged white guys talking about what could happen, we had young people actually going through what they were predicting is going to happen. So there's a dramatic element to it.
The people of Iran, they're quite progressive, but their government is not. They took the streets in peaceful protest. They wanted democracy to return. They see how the world is changing, how it's finding new solutions for policies, for technologies, for energy. But their government wouldn't have it. They clamped down, violent oppression, hundreds dead, thousands arrested. Their excuse? The ships blown up the Strait of Hormuz. A terrorist attack to block this crucial shipping lane for oil.
So really the main challenge at this point, and I don't know how much you guys know about transmedia, which is very simply defined as multiple platform storytelling. And what a lot of people are doing at this time are creating stories that you have to jump to several platforms. And I knew that with this sort of story, it was hard enough to get people to pay attention to one platform. So the real innovation that I think that we did in this project was to take a multiple platform experience and create a single destination. So you go to collapsus.com and you actually experience the gaming element, the fictional element, and the documentary element all in one place instead of having to go to different destinations, like a lot of the different transmedia properties. And so there was a lot of design issues that we had to address.
One of the design choices we made was to approach this using a 3-panel system. And the center panel that you see here is the main sort of fictional storyline. And you'll notice that the right side and the left side will light up at certain points in the story. If you go to the right side, that's the documentary portion where you'll get interviews with experts in the field or additional blogs from the characters. And then to the left, you'll get the interactive portion. They wanted to get the same sort of issues out in a way that was going to be interesting to younger people and the connected generation. So our idea was to create an experience that's sort of an annotated narrative. What this is really, it's part fiction. It's about these 10 young people all over the world and how this energy crisis affects them. It's part documentary, so you have moments where you can go into actual talking heads and people talking about the issues and predictions, and then there's an interactive component. So there's 3 components, so sort of a fiction, a documentary, and an interactive component.
So this was really, the idea was that people are just multitasking now when they're consuming media, and I'm probably one of the worst people about this. Like, it's hard for me to even sit down and watch a movie anymore. So I'm watching a movie, I got Wikipedia open, I'm chatting, I'm checking my email, I'm doing other stuff at the same time. And so I thought, well, this is the way it's moving. Like, let's have it all at the same time. Let's just bring it all and have this sort of like, as many experiences at once. Right around this time, I got diagnosed with ADD, and it all started to make sense. And they gave me like Ritalin, and then it's like, oh, okay, wow, this is overwhelming. But I think that there's, that there's some truth to that still. And even though I am medicated, I still am multitasking when I'm consuming my media. And so this was really just an attempt in that. And the other thing that it sort of really taught me was that, like, okay, you're a storyteller, and you have to have your craft. You have to understand, how to tell that story. Now all of a sudden, I have to think about user experience and user interface. And there's like a whole new set of things that I have to learn, and all these sort of design issues that I never really had to think of before, which is super great. But it all becomes part of that storytelling experience. And so also, I wanted to do the rotoscoping, but by the time we did Scanner Darkly, we were up to 500 hours per minute. It took like over 50 people, a year and a half to do, and it was a horrible thing. But I still like the idea of blending that sort of live action and animation and how to do that. And we had a 60-page script that we had to film in 2 days, and a limited budget, and it was supposed to take place all over the world. It was supposed to take place over 20 years. So how did we do that? Well, we drew a lot of the exterior shots, and we just shot all the interiors in Amsterdam, where I live. But also I knew that we couldn't really do the rotoscoping like I had done in the past, and I started to think, well, do we really need to spend all that time? Is there a way to sort of peel back all the process that, and go back to the original impulse, which was to make something sort of visually arresting that didn't take a lot of time? And so we started to experiment with this, which is sort of a motion illustration method, where we would just take a single photo. So that was just sort of really just sort of starting to figure out a new method that I think is actually going to work, and I'm going to keep on expanding upon, which is taking a single rotoscoped illustration, breaking it up in layers, and then moving within the frame to create a sense of motion and depth within that. And I think it really plays to sort of the current sensibilities of graphic novels and sort of the type of illustrations you see on the internet. At the same time, it's just a much more efficient way to do it. And so it's a lot more fun. You can actually do a lot more different scenes and things like that. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about was just sort of the notion of annotated storytelling, which is sort of different from a lot of the interactive ideas. In this experience, the outcome never really changes. There's only one path that you can go down. But how you choose to go down that path can be different for each individual person. And I believe that this sort of personalized interactive experience is going to be very powerful. And I think that we just started to scratch the surface in this project, but I'm now more and more moving into this idea of personalized interactivity, where it's not a game-like activity, but it may be pulling information from your social network or other information from geolocation from your web browsing experience, could go into the cookies from your browser and create a sort of unique experience that doesn't take a lot of work like pushing buttons or saving things, but creates a story around you. So, and that's Collapsus.
Great. Cool. Thank you for that. That was amazing. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, so Submarine commissioned this, really. And you did manage to release it simultaneous with the television broadcast of,
Yes.
of Energy Risk?
Yeah, yeah. They released it with the, I think it was released exactly right after the television broadcast. So they had the documentary on TV, and then there was a short teaser trailer, and they flashed the URL, and then the experience began online.
Right. And was that successful?
Yes.
Did it go well?
At first when we showed it to VPRO before the television thing, they didn't really know what it was. They were just sort of like, what is this, you know? And what happened is that it became more and more popular. So it was released only to the Dutch audiences at first, but then once we released it internationally, then it started to gain a lot of attention, and
But it was released on the internet.
Yeah.
So how was it released only to the Dutch audiences? I mean, could other people not access it?
They geo-blocked it. Yeah.
Okay.
So you can basically keep certain IPs from, going
I
into
had
that.
no idea that kind of thing went on.
I'm sure there's a lot of people here who do know how to geo-block.
Right. And then in terms of, so the goal was to get more eyes on the project, but also younger target audience.
Yeah.
And so that was mission accomplished there.
They did that. I mean, they basically did all these surveys, and they found out that people my age don't like it. Like 40 and over. Mm-hmm. They want the lean back passive experience, and that the younger people do respond to more sort of interactive choices. And I think, especially with a project like this, it was the first one where I was really dealing with user interface and experience. And because we were so rushed that you really have to beta test it a lot. And I think that we made some mistakes in how to sort of really guide the people through it. Like, I think you really need a tutorial to really show people how the interaction works. Like, every video game has it.
And after you released it, did you go back in and make changes and corrections?
I wanted to. We just didn't have the budget at that time. So we'd spent all the money.
So now that you've, one other question, I know that people hate answering this question. It's just incredibly edifying for people who maybe are trying to emulate something like yours. Can you give us a ballpark for the budget?
The budget, I would guess, I didn't produce it, and when they first told me about it, it was like $400,000. I thought, okay, great. But what they didn't tell me was that they've already spent a lot of this money. So that they actually had gone through a couple of iterations of it, and that money wasn't there. And so I agreed to it on that budget. But then when it came down to it, they're like, "Oh, we're out of money." I was like, "What do you mean we're out of money?" They're like, "Oh no, that." I was like, "What about our budget?" And they're like, "Oh no, we spent half that already."
Right.
And so it was really, I think if you go to collapsus.com right now, what you're seeing is somewhere between $200,000 and $250,000 budget.
And you may have said this before, but I missed it. How long did it take you from the time you were commissioned to deliver this?
That's a good question, because I also
had a baby at some time?
Yeah, like 5 months, I think. Yeah, it seemed really quick, but seemed sort of long at the same time. I'm not sure.
Right. Is that when you had your baby?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay. Well, so then there's that blur. Great. So then once you completed this, in terms of the potential for other projects to do something like this, to expand their audience, have you been approached about other projects? Have you thought about other projects that you want to do this way, or has it changed the way you want to create as an artist?
Yeah, I don't want to make movies anymore. Like pretty much I want to work on the computer, and I want that to be the platform. I want the internet to be the main thing that is the way that I can reach people. And everything that I'm developing now, there's some projects that I'm still developing as films as well, but each one has an interactive component to it, and each one would be considered transmedia. And I think almost everything I'm doing is a hybrid of some sort, where I'm doing live action as well as animation in it. And sometimes it's not real obvious. I'm shooting a movie in November in Somalia about pirates. And it's going to be a traditional feature film, but then there's going to be a completely different...
But you're directing or producing?
Directing.
Yeah.
It's going to have a transmedia component that's going to be completely different from the thing, but it will support it at the same time.
So you've been developing these simultaneously?
Always. Everything I'm doing right now, I think that the interactive part is just as important as sort of the traditional platform portion of it.
It's interesting because before the session we spoke briefly, and you missed the last session that we did, and you asked me about it, and when I told you about it, you said, "Oh no, I'm a neo-Luddite, and I'm not interested in those things, and no, I completely disagree with all of the conclusions that you drew from it," which was fine, despite the fact that you weren't there. But I'm curious. It's like you're talking about not working about both taking traditional mediums and right from the get-go creating internet components. And you're also talking about staying at home and just working on the computer. So you're thinking way outside the box in terms of how things have been going for a long time now. So which part is it that you disagree with? Because you also said that you've got ADD and you're a multitasker. So that when you're watching something on television, you're on your checking something on the internet, you're chatting online,
Right.
How do you what's the nuance of differentiation between what we're talking about and your view?
I view technology as a tool, and a tool primarily that can be utilized in a way that a carpenter would view his tools.
Okay.
And
So
for me,
it's the content and the story.
the core of it is always going to be storytelling. So we could sit here and we could talk about all kinds of technology and platforms and ways to utilize that. But if you don't have an interesting story to tell, then it doesn't really matter at all. And the other thing that I always come back to is just sort of like, what's the passion or the heart in what you're doing or what you're trying to say? And I think that a lot of times the technology sort of takes that away. So I'm very aware of technology, but at the same time, I'm also very leery of technology. I'm not on any social networks. I don't tweet. All those things, I'm horrified. I do have a newborn daughter, and I just think that the world for her is going to be really different in the way that everything is going to be recorded now. And I actually kind of miss the days where there's mystery, where people don't know where you've been or what you're doing or what you're working on. And so I actually try really hard when I'm working on new projects not to let people know about it, because I want it to be surprised. Like the way that when I was younger and I'd be waiting for an album from a band that I liked, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's what they've been doing for 3 years. They've been making this cool new concept. And I like that, and I miss that now, because even though I'm a big fan of sort of postmodern, culture, and I like the idea of deconstructing things, like now everything's deconstructed. Like it's almost too transparent. We know too much about what's going on in the process. So if you're a fan of a of a filmmaker or a band, you know what they're working on already. They're leaking the songs already, you know, all these things. And I miss that sense of mystery. So.
Do you have another project that you're, okay, so you don't want to talk about things you're developing now because you want it to be a surprise in the market. Is there another project that's out right now that you think is amazing and has been really inspiring to you?
You know, I think in terms of like interactive, was it the Downtown Wilderness, Chris Milk?
Yeah.
That music video I thought was really great because that really
Canadian band, Arcade Fire?
Arcade Fire, yes.
Yay, go Canada.
And they've done an amazing amount of cool interactive videos. I mean, whoever's making those choices for them, who they work with, are great. All the NFB interactive projects, all of those are really great.
Anybody here from the NFB?
Nope.
Nice shout out to the NFB there.
Yeah.
All the NFB interactive. Yay, Canada again.
You know, I mean, I mean, and I'm just completely fascinated by everything that's happening today. It just happens so fast. And it's a weird time if you're interested in basically movie making and like how the technology is changing that, but then you're also interested in this other transmedia thing where you have to be aware of what's going on in the social networks. Like if you're reading Deadline, you know, .com and, you know, Mashable.com, you have so many different things that you have to deal with every single day. I just don't know how you can keep up with it. So I kind of just filter it. Like I try to watch what's happening and I kind of watch the trends. And so like Facebook comes out with this new timeline thing and I'll watch the video and I'll get it, you know? And I'll just be like, oh, I'm so glad I don't have to deal with that. But I know that whenever I'm making something, I have to sort of take that into account. And so it's...
So it sounds like it's more the issue of personal privacy and also the mystery, the question of mystery. So those are two things that are important to you.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't like the fact that I'm addicted to my computer. I don't like the fact that, you know, my baby's already like on the iPad and doing stuff. So it you know, sometimes I'm like...
And she's blogging.
Yeah, and I'm chatting with the person who's right next to me and things like that. It's just weird. Or you go to a coffee shop now and everybody's on their computers on the coffee shop. And nobody's talking at a coffee shop anymore. And I miss the days when like you
either
go
that
to a
or
coffee
everyone
shop.
is. Yeah. And you're not hearing their conversations because they're going through the keyboard.
Exactly. You know, and I just miss the day when people are like talking, you know, face to face. But at the same time, I love being able to Skype and, you know, instead of traveling all the time or, you know, because my mother lives in another country than where I live. In order for her to see her granddaughter, we Skype. It's great. It's awesome. So there's good parts to it as well.
What about making money?
Yep. How do I get money for my project, right? Is that everybody's question? It's a completely valid question. There's no stock answer for it. And everybody I know, no matter how seasoned they are, no matter how famous they are, every single project, it's always a challenge. And it's always different. The best thing that I can say is that whenever you're trying to tell a story, you have to be creative in how you're going to tell that story and how to get it out. And you also have to be creative on how to get money. And in many of the same ways that you have to be calculated in some ways in telling that story, you also have to be calculated in figuring out how to get that money. And there's no standard answer. And I think that sometimes that the story should come first, and then you find out, well, how can I support this story? You know, what are the platforms for that story? And then what are the ways that, where does that need filled? How can I fill that need in order to get the support for that story? And every single project I do, sometimes it's government funding, sometimes it's commercials, sometimes it's technology companies, sometimes it's traditional Hollywood companies. There's just I'm completely open to any sort of situation as long as it doesn't compromise the story.
And so when you say commercials, does that mean that you, in the commercial that you mentioned previously, that you use the money from that to sort of pay forward on another project that you're doing?
I've always done it. I mean, I think that I've always been able to make a living because I had to with what I was doing, but I was always willing to balance the projects out. So I would do, you know, I've directed commercials before, music videos. I've also done a lot of consulting work that I probably wouldn't have chosen to do, but I would do it in order to do that. I've, times I've made good money, but also I've blown it too. So I mean, it's just sort of, money's always just sort of this thing that, like, if it's there, it just sort of slips through my fingers like water anyway. Like, and so I've never really given it that much thought, as long as I had to.
But something like Waking Life is presumably something where, I mean, you made it on a very low budget and then you sold to Fox Searchlight.
Right.
So that's, I mean, I don't know what the breakdown is in terms of the producer and everybody, but it's like that's a nice payday.
Yeah, I mean, Waking Life was an exception though too. Mm-hmm. I mean, Waking Life was that one, that handful of films at Sundance that causes a buzz and gets picked up by a distributor, and that was 2001, which was a better time to be making films than 2011, unfortunately for you guys. And it really, with every single film, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to learn from it as far as the craft of making it and telling that story. I do the same thing business-wise. I mean, I don't have a background in business, I don't have that passion, but you try to learn and you try to be smart just the way you are with every other thing, and eventually you start to learn some things, and hopefully you get some people around you that you trust and some people that you keep on working with as well. But there's no great answer except that you got to be smart and creative, just like everything else. And I think that's good. I mean, the part of me that used to hate it, that's just like, oh man, I'm not an entrepreneur, but then I started to look at it and think like, well, this is just another extension of that story, just like the poster. Like, what's that? That poster is going to convey something about what you're trying to say. And so now I love dealing with the poster. Where you're getting the money from also conveys something about what you're trying to say. So I feel like it's all part of that story, and it's all part of what the tale you're trying to.
Are you actively involved in reformatting whatever it is you're creating for like iPhone and for iPad and for the internet? And are you involved in that, or? I
mean, I started out, I wanted to be the director, right? Like the lead singer of the band. Like, everybody wants to be the lead singer, but nobody really knows, wants to go through the work and everything. And then I realized very early on that the people that I knew who were successful were people who weren't just directors, people who really got dirty and really could do almost any aspect of it. And so I'm very comfortable now doing almost any aspect of production.
Well, you're an actor as well, right?
Yeah, well, that was Rick's. Rick said, be in front of the camera, and then you'll know what it's like to be behind the camera. And again, like, none of it really, the technology aspects of it don't really intimidate me, and I just want to learn about it, because I feel like the more that you know, the more that you can control it, the better you're able to convey what you're trying to say.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the future. Where do you think things are going, or not necessarily where are they going based on where they are currently, but where would you like to see them go?
Well, right now, it seems like it's a tough time to be making movies, but I think it's a great time to be telling stories. And if you're open to different ways of telling those stories, then I think it's a super great time to be doing that. And I talked to a lot of filmmakers, and a couple of people really approached me about wanting to produce their projects and things like that. And I'll look at it and I'll be like, hey, this is super cool. This will go over great on the internet. And they're like, no, I don't want it to go on the internet. I want it to be at Sundance. And I'm like, well, it doesn't really, the chances you're going to get a bigger audience. You can actually get a return, if it's on the internet. But they just have this lust for the theatrical. And it's almost a fetish. And I think if you can kind of get rid of that notion and not really think that, like, this is the only way for your story to be seen, and maybe it is. And if it is, then great, then that's what you should do. But if it's not, then I think there's a lot of opportunity to tell those stories. And again, you have to be creative in how you get those stories out there. And never, I don't think, in the history of time, so with all my technology bashing, it's the greatest time to be able to get your word out. It's the greatest time, that you can just sort of have an idea and you can just transmit that to as many people as possible who will listen to you. And I think that's what's super exciting about technology right now, because before there was a graphical interface for the World Wide Web, I was like Xeroxing stuff and going and pasting it up on trees and things like that. Now it's like you can just sort of type it out and it goes out to millions of people. I mean, it's super cool.
So then part of the incentive behind you moving specifically to the internet is the idea of reaching as many people as possible.
It's reaching as many people as possible, but it's also not having to compromise what I want to do.
Because it's less expensive?
It's the idea is that I would say probably my initial impulse was that I wanted to have more of a feedback and relationship with the audience. And I don't know if that's really worked out the way that I thought it would. But I think that if you're going to make a movie, especially with a studio, there's a bit of a bottleneck in distribution. I mean, even if you make it the greatest movie in the world and you don't want to make a deal with the studio, you can go out and you can distribute it yourself and you can get some notice, but it's still very difficult to break the sort of the monopoly that a couple of companies have. And I see the technology as a way to go around that bottleneck. That you can all of a sudden you can be your own studio. All of a sudden, and they're making a lot of money right now doing things the way that they are comfortable with, even though they know that that's going to change rapidly very soon, But they're confident enough that there's really no way that you can compete with the studio, because you can't compete with their marketing muscle. You're not going to spend $20 million to get your movie out. You can't compete with the budget of their films. You're not going to spend $100 million to make a movie, and you're not going to have Tom Cruise, right?
But it's also getting increasingly difficult to get independent films financed, and the budgets are, there's big budget films, and there's a sort of no man's zone that's sort of between the $7 to $12 million range. And so it's like if you don't hit either above or below that, then where are you?
Yeah.
And as an emerging filmmaker, it's hard. So this is a great other option for people to still tell their stories. One thing that I'm curious about, though, is that sometimes I read novels and I think, oh, this would make a great film. Then others where I think this would never make a good film because like an Elmer Leonard novel naturally lends itself to feature film adaptation. Not that they've all been done well, but some have been great. And so I'm wondering if it's maybe the same thing here. Maybe that's your natural medium. That's where you feel most comfortable, where you can express yourself. You have an intimate relationship with the medium despite your technology phobia. Whereas some other people, maybe the best thing for them is feature film or a play, because they write best as dialogue, and it's not very visual. So sometimes I think it's a combination of the story that you're telling, but how you tell that story. And so the internet is, I mean, I do think the internet is not just the future, it's very much upon us, but you're clearly leading the pack in terms of how you're telling stories in very creative ways on the internet to engage with audiences. And
well, thank you.
And that's presumably that's another way forward for many people. So I think an exciting one.
Well, it's also, I mean, right now, if you're going to make a movie, there's a very set way that you're going to make it. It's going to be about 90 pages. It's going to have 3 acts. We all know what the next shot is going to be. If you're a filmmaker, you know what the next shot's going to be, pretty much when you're watching a film, right? But right now, with the internet, it's the Wild West. I mean, there is no set way. You don't know, like, how long should this experience be? How many acts really makes a satisfying thing? They still don't know, and it's changing. A couple of years ago, they were like, nothing will play more than 3 minutes on the web. Well, today, a lot plays more than 3 minutes on the web. So just a couple of years makes a big difference, and people's habits are changing. And so it's very dynamic, whereas in film, the changes are much slower. So in that sense, I think the internet's the experimental medium right now. So, I grew up in the 70s. I remember 70s experimental film, very vividly. And I remember, it seemed like everything was possible at that moment. That film was just going to go crazy. And like the experimental films, what happens now isn't, those experiments aren't happening on film in the theater. They're happening on the internet.
Right. Well, I think we're going to open it to the audience for some questions. Does anybody have any questions? Shy. Okay, the couple at the back. So up there, and then there, over in the center.
This has been absolutely fascinating, but I have a number of questions. You said you released a project on BitTorrent, and did you actually realize any kind of money from that?
I didn't, but I didn't clear any of the rights either. And I could have, but I was curious. It was more of an experiment. I didn't want to really spend a lot of time on it. I made an hour-long documentary about a Scorsese documentary that was never really seen, that you could only see on BitTorrent. So it was really kind of about piracy, but I found the guy who was actually the subject of this 30 years later and sort of talked to him about it. And it was, in a weird way, it's about Scorsese. And so it had a lot of clips. It had like Pulp Fiction, all these Scorsese films, the original, film that I couldn't even track down, who had the rights to it. And what I was telling people at the time was like, okay, if you release your movie on BitTorrent, you'll get invited to festivals. You can sell it to television, DVD, all these other things. And sure enough, it got invited to a bunch of festivals. It had a big premiere at the Rome International Film Festival, big red carpet premiere, after I released it on BitTorrent. People asked to buy it. I didn't sell it to them because I didn't have the rights, but it didn't affect anything. So it was really just an experiment to see and to sort of prove what I thought at that time, which was that it wasn't going to hurt you if you used it.
The other thing you said that I found interesting is you wanted I can't quite remember your words, but it was a better relationship with your audience through the internet. But I'm just wondering, do you miss sitting in a room with an audience, hearing them respond to the material?
I always do. I mean, I'm a big fan of that. And even if I'm doing something that's going to just be on the internet, I'll still sit with those people and experience it. Not so much, there's a lot of filmmakers who hate the focus groups. And I actually love them. I mean, it's a great opportunity to sort of watch the film and view it through someone else's eyes. But yeah, I do like that. But then once I do that, once something's released, I've never even gone back and watched it. Like I've never watched Scanner Darkly or Waking Life. I didn't even see it when Waking Life premiered at Sundance. I didn't even watch it. So, but
question.
Do you remember the Aha video?
Yeah. Take on Me. Yeah, of course.
At what point did your animation start to break into, I don't want to call it mainstream, like at what point, you said you were directing music videos and doing commercials. Mm-hmm. At what point did it become affordable for corporations and companies to hire you to actually start doing this where you weren't doing it for free? And did you do the Kanye West Power video? Like what stuff did you do?
No, I know the video you're talking about. And that also was rotoscoped. It was always affordable, and it was probably cheaper for them to hire me than to hire somebody else. Like, I would have done the Kanye video cheaper than the guy who did it, I'm sure. So they should have called me. But the interesting thing about Kanye is that he always is sort of really on the cutting edge of sort of digital art and stuff like that. And it's great that he uses a lot of his music videos to sort of give people more exposure to certain artists and techniques. But yeah, the Aha was, Swedish band, were they? From the 80s? Norwegian, yeah.
Can you pass the microphone over, please? Okay. If you have questions, can you put your hands up just so I can go to the next person? Okay, so down here next. Go ahead.
Just with all the technology sort of taking over and the fact that everybody's sort of plugged in and connected, and a friend of mine said something really funny. She said, well, that's not news, it already happened. And just how we're so immediate and living so quickly with Twitter and everything like that. I was wondering if you have any idea what's next? Thoughts?
I don't know. I have to think about that for a while. The Matrix, perhaps? So the robots rising? Terminator? I think it's scary and illuminating at the same time. I think that there's good and bad. And again, I really view it as just a tool. and you can do good things with it or bad things with it. And I think that right now we're kind of in this sort of love phase, and the social networking thing is just the biggest thing that's going on right now. And it's weird, and we were just talking earlier, like I'm just so glad that it wasn't around when I was in college, you know, and that you have that record of how foolish you were. You know, I mean, to me, that's the worst thing is like all of a sudden you do something stupid and it's just recorded and it's there forever. I recently...
Well, now you can untag the photos where people tag you throwing up somewhere, so that's good.
But I recently made something, and I took some photos off Facebook, and the thing I did for TV, and a woman was like really upset about it, and I was like, your photos are on Facebook. I mean, like, don't put it out there if you don't want it to be there. You know, like you're basically putting it out, but you have to be aware of it, and be aware that when you're making Facebook, you're signing off the rights to everything that you put on there, and you're giving it to Facebook.
That's actually just been contested by, well, Facebook is denying that that's the case, and they said that they've changed that up because there was a big backlash to that. So, so
I still think Facebook should be paying each and every one of you that's on it. They've become billionaires off your data. So just demand that they pay you. Or somebody started a new social network that actually does pay for people putting stuff in there.
Yeah. There's another question. There's a question at the back. Sorry, after you at the back.
Question. Sorry, go next?
Oh, sorry, it's who you're on. Yeah, you're next. Somebody can pass the microphone, Sheila.
Right. I'm kind of interested in the hybridity that you use, the faction and documentary, and having taught journalism students, I kind of wondered if there are any kind of markers in regards to the fictional components on that website. So you said on the right was documentary. Yeah. Then this, in the center was sort of a play on that. I think it's really effective and interesting. But when you sort of looking from a traditional documentary point of view, it's like, where do you mark or indicate this is fiction now, or at least lead the viewer, a young viewer, towards this is, you know, getting out of the documentary realm?
Well, if Fox News isn't going to put those markers, and I'm not either. So
I understand.
I mean, I think we live in a really weird time where, like, what's real, what's fiction, you know, like it's sort of, again, I mean, we live in this sort of like postmodern hybrid where everything is sort of just combining right now. Right. And I'm very comfortable with that.
And the Dutch company brought it up, who also kind of commissioned traditional documentary. I wondered if there was part of the discussion around.
No, you know what? It was sort of like showing a dog a card trick. They were just like, what is this? You know, and, which is fine. I like that reaction, and I'm used to it. But, you know, I don't know what it is. And I'm willing to discover that if other people are willing to discover it with me.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm not critiquing, just wondering.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I will say that having made documentaries, every single camera shot, every single edit, every single, you know, music cue, everything is questionable.
But you teach
journalism
students,
right.
You know, be ethical.
You know, this is interesting. Were you here for the morning session on documentary? The morning session was called The Pursuit of Objectivity, and we had 3 filmmakers who were discussing, you know, the challenges of pursuing objectivity, and even though they would like to say that you know, what they're really pursuing is their own truth, because as soon as you put a camera up, nothing is objective anymore, because it changes the person who's speaking to you, it changes you, you have an opinion, you can't stifle your opinion entirely, you can try, and sometimes you might compensate in the opposite direction. So in terms of, like, when I watch this, I'm really clear what's documentary, and I'm really clear what's fiction as well. So I don't have any confusion about it. And I think the same thing. Like it's, for one thing, this is very much a creative extension of original material. And I don't know that that's actually your role is to state that. I think really it seems to me the idea was to engage more viewers as much as possible on the ideas, not to say this is true and this is not true, because some of the people that you're interviewing could be lying. So, you know, what is the truth?
But they don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, the Somali documentary I'm doing about the pirates, I very much have been careful to deal with the co-producers and the co-financiers, and I've told them, like, this is a subjective documentary. You know, this is really not about objectivity. I'm not interviewing all the alternate viewpoints or other sides. you know, I'm doing just very much the people who I'm interviewing, it's going to be about their reality.
There's a question with the man in the hat. Go ahead. And
Yeah, hi.
then
Just a quick technical question. I like the motion of the camera through the stills, the multi-layered stills. What technology was that? Motion? Or?
After Effects.
It was After Effects.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I pretty much try to go with like the simplest thing possible. And if the simple tools don't work, then I have to go up. But always try to use consumer level, you know, easiest, the things that people know how to use the most. And I think with technology, that's a big trick. You know, like people always want to get the computer with the most expensive computer or the highest functioning software. It's like, no, don't do that. Get the cheapest computer that'll do the job and use the simplest software possible.
question over there.
Have you gotten negative feedback from traditional filmmakers? Like I work for a digital agency, and sometimes we get the feeling that traditional filmmakers might be concerned that they have less and less relevance in a really digital world. And I was wondering if major studios or major production houses have come out and kind of pressured you to change the way you do things.
No. I mean, everybody's been pretty cool. And I mean, like, I've gotten negative feedback just because people didn't like it, you know, but never been like, you got to stop making that. I mean, maybe, like, when I first started in Austin and I was making these movies, I was sort of making movies without a big crew. And sometimes, you know, the crew people would sort of say something to me like, hey, you're putting us out of a job. But it was more of a joke than anything else. And it's not like if I'm taking jobs away from one part, I'm giving jobs in another area or something like that. But I mean, Hollywood's always been super interested in what I've been doing. Not that they really want to do it, but certainly, I mean, the fact that like Waking Life, the fact that it was made for so little money and it got distribution, like everybody in Hollywood wanted to have a meeting. So, you know, just out of curiosity.
Did you meet with them?
Yeah.
Other question? Okay, one last question here in the center.
Thank you. I found that really interesting, partly in relation to the animation and the hybridity, but also about the music. I noticed in Collapsus it's quite steeped in music. I'm wondering how much you have a say over the music, or do you work with musicians or sound designers? Or
I almost always put in a temp track with songs that I like that sort of have the same mood and the setting. And then like for Collapsus, I had an original composer sort of work with that. And so I put the temp track in with him, and then he would sort of do his interpretation of it. And then I would sort of talk with him and work with him on that aspect of it. And then for the other projects, it really just depends. I mean, I like music like everybody else does, and I listen to it, not as much as I used to. And then like just recently, I was like thinking like, what are all the new cool bands, you know? But I mean, music is just like the easiest way to elevate mood and tone in a movie. I mean, like watch a scene with different music, it's like completely changes it. It's crazy. I mean, and it's a bit of a cheat, but it's a great cheat. So if you're a filmmaker, then get your music on.
Yeah, that's a great tip, actually. To strip out all the dialogue, everything, just put on different music and watch the scene again. It's a great tip.
I can imagine a version of what you've done there as being a music video, or you know, a shortened kind of music video style short too.
Well, I mean, like trailers are kind of, I mean, trailers like music videos are really sort of selling an idea, and you kind of want that to sort of make it, you know, you want to grab people, get their attention, and sort of do that. But
so, in terms of expanding stories across multiple platforms, it sounds as though you've found a platform that works for you, and you're just going to expand your own storytelling on that platform. Which to me is actually a fascinating conclusion to something. I thought it was going in a completely different direction, but it's been a really great journey, and I love all of the experimentation that you've done, and it's very, very inspiring. So thank you so much for talking to us about it, and thank you all for coming.